Welcome. Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Catskills. Our minister is Reverend Barb Janice Dillon, and I am Jenny O'Grady Giddy, a member of the Worship Committee and the Worship Associate for this morning. And thanks to Don for taking on the role of usher. And welcome to our Zoom attendees this morning. I'm going to start sharing the slides. And slideshow from beginning. So the prelude today is classical music to read by. And there are selections from Mozart, Chopin, Debussy, but we will only hear a few minutes of this music. I wish we had more time to listen. That YouTube selection does go on for a couple of hours. Unitarian Universalism is a liberal religious faith that carries no creed and welcomes all seekers. We are guided by a set of principles and written sources that encompass the many ways we come to know and understand the world, the universe, and the divine. Our principles are important to us at UU Catskills, and we live our values on a daily basis. Indeed, for this talk that I have prepared today, I found looking back at our principles has been very helpful. We affirm that Black Lives Matter. We are a welcoming congregation for the LGBTQ community. We are a congregational affiliate of the Ulster Immigrant Defense Network, and we're an active voice in the effort to address climate change. We welcome all to join our climate action team. Kathy Kasner is here with us today, and in the breakout room, do talk to Kathy and see about joining the climate action team. If you would like to contact someone at UU Catskills, here's a list of the contacts, but you can also find this on the website. If you're a visitor online and would like to be added to our mailing list, you can put your name and email address in the chat box area. I remind those of you joining us online that during the service, you are encouraged to stay muted. We have a newsletter, comes out monthly, but check the website, uucatskills.org, for updated information. We're showing our announcements prior to the service. Please join me in lighting the chalice in grateful, loving community. Even in the darkest of times, may its flame light paths to courage, justice, and hope. Join with me in saying the affirmation. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love to all living beings. May we know once again that we are not isolated, but connected in wonder and joy to mystery and miracle in the universe, in this community, and in each other. Opening words for this service, commemorating Banned Book Week 2022. I've put here our UU fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And this is a quote from Reverend Paige Giddy. As responsible religious seekers, we recognize that we are privileged to be free, to have resources to pursue life beyond mere survival, to continually search for truth and meaning, to exist beyond bonds of dogma and oppression, and to wrestle freely with truth and meaning as they evolve. Now let's listen to one of our favorite UU hymns, We Are a Gentle, Angry People, sung by the choir of the First Unitarian Church of Baltimore.
Straight together, all of us queer, because we are not tied into outworn roles. but live into new ways as communities of love, communities of promise, resistance, hope, and queer joy. And we are straight together, all of us, holding high moral aims, a deep and compassionate inclusion, claiming the high calling the prophets have pronounced to many generations, straight and queer and fabulous. We are gentle, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are gentle, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives.
So why read novels? They can be dangerous, some people think, but novels can serve a moral function by enabling us to enter the lives of others imaginatively. And as Julia Donaldson put it, I opened a book, and this is read by one of my favorite young readers, Eleanor.
I opened a book and in I strode. Now nobody can find me. I've left my chair, my house, my road, my town, and my world behind me. I'm wearing the cloak, I've slept on the ring, I've swallowed the magic potion. I fought with a dragon, dined with a king, and dived in a bottomless ocean. I opened a book and made some friends. I shared their tears and laughter, and followed the road with its bumps and bends to the happily ever after. I finished my book and out I came. The cloak can no longer hide me. My chair and my house are just the same, but I have a book inside me.
But not everyone feels that way. Book banning has been with us throughout the ages, but in the past few years, there's been a major increase in the number of books. And recently, targeted book banners are LGBTQ books, books on race. School libraries are the locus of attention of parents, followed by public libraries. And we'll return to the topic during the homily. So we're going to pause. Let's see, pause recording. All right. Now we come to our meditative silence, but Catherine's going to lead us in a meditation. So Catherine, if I could hand it over to you.
Breathe in peace, breathe out worry, breathe in healing, breathe out stress, breathe in love, breathe out worry, breathe in peace, breathe out stress.
Thank you, Catherine. And for a couple of minutes, pause in our busy days. Now we have a story, not for children only. Warning, this book you're about to hear has been banned by some. Judge for yourself.
And Tango makes 3. In the penguin house in the zoo, there are penguin families. Every year, at the very same time, the girl penguins start noticing the boy penguins, and the boy penguins start noticing the girls. When the right girl and the right boy find each other, they become a couple. 2 penguins in the penguin house were a little bit different. One was named Roy, and the other was named Silo. Roy and Silo were both boys, but they did everything together. They bowed to each other and walked together. They sang to each other and swam together. Wherever Roy went, Silo went too. They didn't spend much time with the girl penguins, and the girl penguins didn't spend much time with them. Instead, Roy and Silo wound their necks around each other. Their keeper, Mr. Gramsay, noticed the 2 penguins and thought to himself, they must be in love. Roy and Silo watched how the other penguins made a home, so they built a nest of stones for themselves. Every night, Roy and Silo slept there together, just like the other penguin couples. And every morning, Roy and Silo woke up together. But one day, Roy and Silo saw that the other couples could do something they could not. The mama penguin would lay an egg. She and the papa penguin would take turns keeping the egg warm until finally it would hatch. And then there would be a baby penguin. Roy and Silo had no eggs to sit on to keep warm. They had no baby chick to feed and cuddle and love. Their nest was nice, but it was a little empty. One day, Roy found something that looked like what the other penguins were hatching, and he brought it to their nest. It was only a rock, but Silo carefully sat on it, and sat. Then Mr. Gramsay got an idea. He found an egg that needed to be cared for, and he brought it to Roy and Silo's nest. Roy and Silo knew just what to do. They moved the egg to the center of their nest. Every day they turned it, so each side stayed warm. Some days, Roy sat while Silo went for food. Other days, it was Silo's turn to take care of their egg. Until one day, they heard a sound coming from inside their egg. Peep, 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 it said. Roy and Silo called back. Squawk, squawk. Peep, peep, answered the egg. Suddenly, a tiny hole appeared in the egg's shell. And then, crack! Out came their very own baby. She had fuzzy white feathers and a funny black beak. Now Roy and Silo were fathers. We'll call her Tango, Mr. Gramsay decided, because it takes 2 to make a tango. Roy and Silo taught Tango how to sing for them when she was hungry. They fed her food from their beaks. They snuggled her in their nest at night. Tango was the very first penguin in the zoo to have 2 daddies. Soon, Tango grew strong enough to leave the nest. Roy and Silo took her for a swim, just like all the other penguin families. And all the children who came to the zoo could see Tango and her 2 fathers playing in the penguin house with the other penguins. Hooray, Roy! Hooray, Silo! Welcome, Tango! They cheered. At night, the 3 penguins returned to their nest. There they snuggled together and, like all the other penguins in the penguin house, and all the other animals in the zoo, and all the families in the big city around them, they went to sleep.
Charming story, and great that it's based on true events in the Central Park Zoo. So the half-plate donations for September will be shared with Sustainable Hudson Valley, and their mission is to speed up, scale up, jazz up, and leverage progress against climate change, creating communities where people and nature thrive. And you can see the ways to donate on the screen. So the offertory is Lift Me Up by Key of Q from Kingston.
My voice, let it be in song, a defiant note in the face of wrong. I won't stand alone, we'll stand side by side, 'cause we know that love is always justified. When I lift my When they try to divide us, it will only unite us. I lift my voice. When I lift my voice, let it be in song, a defiant note in the face of wrong. I won't stand alone, we'll stand side by side, 'cause we know that love is always justified. When they try to divide us, it will only unite us. I lift my voice.
Now we'll have a statement from the American Library Association, read by a friend of mine, librarian Patricia Carroll Mathis. Now I would like to introduce an old friend of mine, Patricia Carroll Mathis. Patricia has been a librarian for many years, and like me and many of us, is very concerned about the challenges to books in public and school libraries. Patricia is going to read a statement from the American Library Association.
Okay. The freedom to read is essential to our democracy. It's continually under attack. Private groups and public authorities in various parts of the country are working to remove or limit access to reading materials, to censor content in schools, to label controversial views, to distribute lists of objectionable books or authors, and to purge libraries. These actions apparently arise from a view that our national tradition of free expression is no longer valid, that censorship and suppression are needed to counter threats to safety or national security, as well as to avoid the subversion of politics and the corruption of morals. We as individuals devoted to reading, and as librarians and publishers responsible for disseminating ideas, wish to assert the public interest in the preservation of the freedom to read.
Thank you, Patricia. Now I would like to introduce. So books are dangerous. Should they be banned? My first time I became aware of book banning going on in this country, well, not the first time, I guess, but this year, at the sheer number of books that were banned, I was outraged and determined to talk about it, to raise awareness of the issue. As the service this week happens to coincide with the American Library Association's Banned Books Week, it seemed a good time to tackle the topic. In the course of the research I've undertaken for this talk, I feel, however, that I have learned some valuable lessons, particularly about trying not to have a knee-jerk reaction to issues, as there's often more to a story than just one side. This is breaking news. I just heard this yesterday. This is how bad things have got, that they've introduced a resolution condemning book bans. But my personal introduction to banned books was when I read Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton when I was a teenager. It was banned in 1968 by the apartheid government. It's a deeply moving story of the Zulu pastor, Stephen Khumalo, and his son, Absalom, set against the background of a land and a people riven by racial injustice. It gave me an awareness of the situation of people in the country where I had been born, and a deep sympathy for the plight of Africans suffering under a cruel racist system. Despite the tragedy depicted in the book of the murder of a young white man by a young black man in a robbery gone horribly wrong, the understanding, forgiveness, and in the end, acceptance between the two fathers of the two young men, one murdered, the other sentenced to death, gave one hope for a better resolution to the problems of the country. It just helped to show that reading novels can serve as a moral function. It enables us to enter the lives of others imaginatively. It is a transcendence in which we step outside of the self and we embrace a different perspective. As Eleanor read in the poem by Julia Donaldson, it takes you out of yourself and into a different world. Novels force us to not only face, but to experience the terror of illness, poverty, infirmity. They enhance our compassion by compelling us to feel with others, taking us out of the comforts of the focus on oneself. I should add about Cry the Beloved Country. When my nephew was at school many years later, this was a set book for their high school class. So progress had indeed been made. And I think books like this help to bring about change. Of course, like most of us of a certain age, I read this novel by D.H. Lawrence, banned in 1960. The words of the prosecutor make it clear why it was banned. Well, I'm not sure about the effect it had on me, but I do remember it being a real page turner. Book challenges, though they have been with us since the time of Gutenberg, are more common than ever. Between July the 1st, 2021 and March the 31st, 2022, there were 1,586 book bans. Texas led the charge. These are some of the children's books that have been banned. Uncle Tom's Cabin, and some people on the left do not appreciate the paternalism in it. The Lorax was banned in the West because the loggers objected to it, and they put out their own book called The True Axe to show children the value of cutting down trees. Where the Wild Things Are was banned because it was deemed to be too scary. Harriet the Spy was banned because it showed disrespect to adults. Censorship by the numbers. And mainly this chart shows 44% of the challenges take place in school libraries and then public libraries and other academic books. But what's happening now is that a country prosecutor's office, for example, considered charging library employees for stocking books about sex education and containing LGBTQ themes. This is a picture of burning books, Harry Potter amongst them. This was in Tennessee in February of this year. And I was amused to come across this photo from an auction at Sotheby's, a fireproof copy of Margaret Atwood, The Handmaid's Tale. Banning books about Galileo, Moms for Liberty, a right-wing advocacy group. They tried to get a number of books banned from Tennessee schools. but because they contain content that disturbed them. They deemed a book about Galileo to be anti-church. I guess they didn't know that the Pope had, what was it? Galileo's works remained on the Catholic Index until the early 18th century. That's the list of proscribed books. But in 1992, Pope John Paul I issued an official apology for the church's persecution of Galileo. And this book, there's a copy of it in Wake Forest University Library. It's one of the most famous banned books of all time. Galileo's dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, Ptolemaic versus Copernican. So what has caused this upswing in banning? The rise of the far right over the last few years, the acceptance of conspiracy theories amongst many conservatives, exacerbated by the COVID lockdowns and a chance to spend time in the darkest corners of the internet. A deepening cultural divide between the right and the left, and an unwillingness to think rationally about anything which appears to come from the other side. Some of the bans appear ludicrous to many of us, steeped as we are in the tradition of fairy tales and wizardry. Imagine banning Harry Potter because magic and spells are not Christian. It makes you wonder if those people have actually read the Bible. Why is representation in literature important, especially for young readers? Books can be windows into the great wide world out there, but they can also be mirrors. This Diary of a Wimpy Kid, when my 5-year-old grandson came to visit a couple of months ago, he was deeply engrossed in this book, Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Anne Frank, another one that's been banned. Jason Reynolds, writing about young Black boys to share his experiences. Castle Adventure, Enid Blyton. I grew up on the books of Enid Blyton, but I know some of them have been taken off library shelves because of the way they perhaps exclude certain segments of society. Is censorship coming just from the right? No. Some of us who lean to the left on social positions have had visceral reactions to certain publications. So there is a fairly new book called I Can't Breathe. And the author has gone through the cases of police brutality against Black people. And he concludes that except for 2 of the cases, the actions of the police were not prompted by racism. So I guess one would have to read the book to make one's own conclusions. The purging of great literature often takes place quietly among woke teachers and librarians. And this is a quote: if the classics aren't exactly banned outright or burned, there's another way, putting them way up high. And author Padma Venkatraman wrote an essay titled Weeding Out Racisms as Invisible Roots, Rethinking Children's Classics. And this I did find interesting in that it's made me think about the books that I grew up with, like the Enid Blyton books, Shakespeare. Shakespeare's deemed a white supremacist. So is it about white supremacy and colonization? Or should we read it with a careful eye to look for the good qualities and explain to young readers that it represents a different time? Or should we ban it altogether? What unites these challenges is a professed desire to shield young readers from dangerous content. But attempts to ban books are frequently motivated by misapprehensions about how children consume and process literature. I'm just going to find that section. So what this author, Tricia Tucker, explains is how children read. Many adults presume that exposure to particular literary content will invariably produce particular effects. Christian author and editor David Kopp acknowledged as much when he addressed the controversy around the 1989 children's book, Heather Has Two Mummies. The deeper dilemma for many Christians who oppose this book is often not a theological one, but an emotional one. It has to do with what we fear, he wrote on the faith-focused website, BeliefNet, in 2001. We fear our kids will be indoctrinated somehow. We fear they'll come to consider homosexuality as normal, and then the part we don't say, become one. Kopp found this fear absurd. He insisted that a book, well-intentioned or otherwise, isn't likely to change our child's sexual orientation. Put simply, children co-create their own reading experiences. Their interpretation of books is informed by their personal and cultural histories, and those interpretations may change over time or when readers encounter the same stories in different contexts. Neither the supposedly healthy nor the supposedly dangerous effects of childhood reading then can be taken for granted. Children are not merely empty vessels waiting to be filled by a text message and images, despite how adults tend to portray young readers as helplessly enthralled to the stories they consume. The English philosopher John Locke, late 17th century idea that humans were born as tabulae rasa, or blank slates, had incalculable influence. The child with no innate traits must be carefully molded. Thus, childhood became a period of intense governance and control, according to the scholar Alison Miller. I found that amusing. I'm sure any parent here with your own children can see that children are not empty slates. They are born with their own personalities, desires, and strong wills. So to go on, the value of unsafe books. Book bans gain traction in cultures that imagine themselves as upholding a barrier between the purity of children and the corruption of the world. I'll just stop sharing for a moment. But this effort can have unintended consequences, argue scholars like Kerry Robinson in her 2013 book on sexuality and censorship. She writes that the regulation of children's access to important knowledge has undermined their development as competent, well-informed, critical thinking, and ethical young citizens. Debates about challenging books would go differently if participants understood young child readers as active participants in their discovery and creation of knowledge. I think as my reading of Lady Chatterley's Lover, my friend Barbara's reading of For Whom the Bell Tolls when she was about 12 or 13, she found that book particularly uplifting, and she still finds it, despite, or perhaps because the scenes of adult intimacy lent it a extra piquancy, but she was particularly impressed with the idea of the people fighting against the oppressive dictators of the time. And for her, it gave her some ideal to hold on to, even though Hemingway's books have been banned in certain circles. Jason Reynolds, the Library of Congress's National Ambassador for Young People's Literature. He's the author of The Oft-Targeted All-American Boys, which depicts a racially charged police beating, offers a different and, I'd argue, healthier way to conceive of children's relationship to reading. There's no better place for a young person to engage and wrestle with ideas that may or may not be their own than a book, he told CNN for an in-depth interview on book banning in America. These stories are meant to be playgrounds for ideas, he says, playgrounds for debate and discourse. Books don't brainwash. They represent ideas. For Reynolds and the other authors, librarians, teachers, parents, commemorating Banned Books Week, adults have a right to disagree with those ideas, but rather than fear the uncomfortable conversations young people bring home, adults can actively encourage them. If the adults are doing their jobs, Reynolds said, the discomfort that often accompanies growth doesn't have to feel like danger. I'll just go back to sharing the screen. This is a quote from Dr. John McWhorter. He's my favorite podcaster and professor of linguistics at Columbia University. It's worthwhile, one would think, to assume first that people's intentions are good ones. Writing someone off as monstrous should be a matter of last resort. To go with that immediately makes for good theater, but it's also a kind of ritualistic hostility. And coming from somebody whom I admire like that really brought me up short, as I wanted to feel this anger against the book banners. But the more I researched it, I could see they perhaps are just motivated by the culture wars, but perhaps they do have an honest idea of protecting their children. But I hope that they would come to see that there are other ways of protecting your children, perhaps by reading with them, sharing their ideas, and commenting with them in the same way as we watch movies with our children and grandchildren and discuss what happens in movies and TV shows And you can share your own principles and values and point out when somebody is acting in an unkind way. So keeping John McWhorter's words in mind, we should remember our UU principles, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. These are Barbara's suggestions. We help others, especially younger humans, clarify their own value systems, develop, fine-tune their moral compasses, and nurture their critical thinking skills. If we do those things and introduce literary material at developmentally appropriate times, and I think that's key. I don't think we need to provide Lady Chatterley's Lover to 10-year-olds. But we do not need to outright ban much content directly. In general, people will be better able to think clearly, logically, symbolically, and morally, and respond to literature in psychosocially healthy ways. What other actions could we take? Join your local public library board or school board. Support initiatives to fund your local library. I put in pictures of the Kingston Library and the Kingston High School, just in case these are relevant to any of you. Ask them to give you their ideas on the story. If it does contain offensive terminology, such as Huckleberry Finn, which has been banned by some because it contains really offensive terminology for Black people. So you could point out how times have changed. We don't use that language anymore. Even To Kill a Mockingbird, one of the favorite books in American society, has been banned by some because of its perceived white paternalistic attitude of Atticus Finch. Set an example yourself. Read widely and share your thoughts on books you've read and recommend to them. The other thing we could do is build a little free library, and UUCC is planning one now. Closing words. Books and ideas are the most effective weapons against intolerance and ignorance. From President Johnson. Time to extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Catherine.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
Thank you. I'm going to create breakout rooms now.